Okay, so I just want to introduce my friend, Raisha Bivens, who I've known for several years through summer. And I'm thrilled. We've been over a year trying to pull this together. And obviously tonight is the night. And I just want to thank you so much for giving us your time and your knowledge and your experience and getting real firsthand information about the Connecticut penal system. So I know that you have a PowerPoint, and I'm excited that we can see and listen to you all at the same time. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint just so it can accompany me as I am talking. But first and foremost, thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everybody here for actually caring about, bringing racial justice to our society and being interested in this issue, right? That says a lot to me about who you all are. And so I'm going to begin by just sharing a little bit about myself. Okay. So again, like Carol said, my name is Raisha Bivens, and I do many things, but one of the things that I hold near and dear to my heart is actually being a justice advocate and a community organizer. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker also by training. And one of the reasons that I got involved and actually advocating for changes in the justice system, it was very personal for me, right? My younger brother, Joshua, was actually incarcerated 4 years ago, and he has schizophrenia. And I was really, one night I got a call from my mother that he was incarcerated. And the next day I learned that he was being charged with assault. And what ensued from that is he was held in pretrial detention for 3 years. And from the day that he was incarcerated, as someone who's a professional social worker and has my license, I was at work on, well, how can I get him to an alternative setting, right? Because, I knew that he has schizophrenia. He had been diagnosed before his incarceration. And I knew that every single thing that he was dealing with legally was a result of him not getting care and treatment. And I was appalled when within a few days of him being incarcerated, the clinicians within the system told me that there was really no alternatives to him being incarcerated. And, in that first week, I really vowed that I was going to make sure that my brother got the care and treatment that he needed, but really that all people in the criminal legal system were going to get the care and treatment that they needed, because there are over 50% of people who are incarcerated that have existing mental health issues. And I was just really appalled that in Connecticut, many people, what the Department of Corrections considers care is that people are held in a cell the size of a parking lot or the size of a very small bathroom, 20 or 21 hours out the day. So, that's a little bit about me. I'm also a trauma therapist. And one of the reasons I became a therapist is because it's clear through research that a lot of people that end up in the criminal justice system and end up incarcerated have trauma that they face throughout their lives that they've never addressed and they never dealt with. Now, I don't want you to, I want to be clear about what I'm saying. When people commit crimes, right, I am a true believer that they should be held accountable. And currently what's happening in the system is that people are not getting treatment for the trauma that has to do with why they ended up in that situation in the first place, okay? So tonight, through this community conversation, I really hope to open your eyes about some of the injustice that are happening in the system, and particularly the work that I'm doing as a board member and as the outreach and engagement coordinator for Stop Solitary Confinement. So let me just, before I move on, I want to just hear from maybe 2 or 3 people, what had you register for this particular talk? Like what made you interested in this one today? And you can just say a little bit about yourself and, and take yourself off mute. I just would love to hear from 2 or 3 people, like what has you say yes, what you were looking to get out of today, and anything you know about solitary confinement or the criminal justice system.
Yes, but you should talk about what you did.
Hello, did I hear somebody? Okay.
Hello.
Go ahead. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This is John. I was something else came up and blocked the other computer, so I'm just here. Just very quickly, I had got a graduate degree in criminal justice with a focus on juvenile justice. Worked for the New York State Division for Youth for a while, and then I shifted my career from criminal justice into workforce development, and worked there at a couple different regional and state levels with a concentration on helping inner city kids get summer jobs.
Got it. Got it. So this is something, and I can't see you for some reason. Did you say your name is John?
I'm John. I'm Ann's husband. Ann
Okay.
Catherine.
Okay,
John's
got it.
I just don't have access to the other computer right now. So you can't see me, but I can see you.
Here we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying, John. So this,
Okay.
oh, hi, there you are. Good to see you. Good to see your face. So I got it, John. It sounds like you've had somewhat of a lifelong commitment to helping young people in the criminal justice system, and that this is just something that you care about. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it is. I've always had a long time interest in criminal justice. I should say when I was in graduate school, I did a project on vulnerable inmates and went to some really horrible institutions and saw the things that were being done. So yeah, I've been interested in it for a long time.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for being here.
Right.
Anyone else? Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? I would love to hear from 1 or 2 other people, just what made you, register for this talk,
Right.
what you know about the injustices in the criminal legal system here in Connecticut. Carol?
This is Haley. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, thank you so much for doing this. I'm really excited to hear your presentation today. I'm not going to turn my camera on because I'm running around my house doing stuff, but I'm paying attention and listening. The thing that drew me in for tonight, besides just a general interest in Connecticut's penal system, is just how I think sometimes we, as a community, kind of think that Connecticut is this very blue state, so it's going to have very liberal laws and policies, especially about incarceration. So what drew me in was just that note about it being the second, I think you said second highest rate of Black men who are incarcerated in solitary confinement. So that drew me in.
Yeah, thank you, Haley. Thank you for being here. And you're right, Connecticut does kind of tout like this image of being a liberal state. And while there has been progress in many areas, we are still lagging behind other states in terms of where we are with our criminal justice system and truly providing people rehabilitation, right? On the one hand, we say that that's the mission here, but in reality, the practices that we're putting in place do not uphold the standard of rehabilitation. So thank you for being here, Haley, and thank you for your interest. And one more person, just one other person would like to share. Randy.
So in 2016, I graduated with a master's in public health. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was racial injustice, in particular, that the incarceration system in the United States is really the biggest provider of mental health services in the country, and how so many people who actually get medication and get some help while they're in there, but once they leave, then they can't get their medication anymore. They can't get, and so then they go back to the behaviors that were a result of the trauma that they experienced going in initially. I've also had an interest in compassion prison project, and just the whole criminal justice system and its disproportionate impact on communities of color in particular. Until recently, I worked at the Connecticut Department of Public Health, but I'm looking to change and do something else and something more that addresses structural racism. So.
Yeah, really, really, really powerful, Randy, everything that you just pointed to. And you're going to hear me talk about my brother throughout this talk, and not because, my brother actually, after 3 years of advocating for him, he is now in the community and he's healthy and well, and that is not how things started. But I'm going to consistently weave him throughout the conversation tonight because his story is not just his story. It's really indicative of what is happening in the criminal legal system. And there are thousands of people, that have a similar story to my brother. And in particular, Randy, what struck me about what you said is that, that in a sense, prisons in Connecticut and really all over the nation have become the new mental health hospitals, right? There are actually like 10 times as many people in prisons in Connecticut than in mental health hospitals. And that's not how it always has been. Okay, so thank you for raising that incredible point. And I'm going to bring back up my slide and I'm going to continue. Okay, so I'm just gonna, this is my brother, and one of the reasons, this is him, just a really happy, loving brother. I'm the oldest, and I'm 7 years older than him, and he just was a jovial kid throughout his life. And at some point, he started really dealing with trauma in his life. My mother dealt with some brutal domestic violence, and I was off in college at the time, but when she actually had the courage to leave her abusive partner, he hid in a closet, and when she came home, he started beating her up with an alcohol bottle. Now, my mother was able to run down 3 flights of stairs and escape, and this guy ran, but my brother at 13 years old came home to see her on the porch with, her face beaten in and having to go to the hospital, and he was scarred. And my brother blamed himself that happened to him. And, he was diagnosed with PTSD very much after that, but really never got the treatment. So instead of, healing and realizing that wasn't his fault, that my mother dealt with that and was assaulted in that way, he internalized it. And that led to this pathway where, he made some choices where he was, as a youngster, was in the juvenile system, but leading up to the time that he was incarcerated 4 years ago, just was really in and out of the criminal legal system. Now, my brother is someone who has gotten creative writing awards throughout his life, was really always known as talented and gifted, but had this struggle with the trauma that he was facing, and as well as blaming himself for that. So I'm going to come, there's another picture, but I'm going to come back and share that later. Okay. So we kind of started touching upon this point already. And can everybody see my slide okay? Because my videos are covering it. So I just want to make sure you can see it. Just nod your head if you can see it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So this is what I was pointing to earlier. There are 10 times as many people with mental health issues in prison rather than in mental health hospitals. And nationally, between 20 and 80% of people incarcerated suffer from mental health issues. Now, I don't know, I don't even fully trust the statistic. I think that in Connecticut, through the research that I've done, the statistic is more on the higher end. 50 to 80% of the people incarcerated in Connecticut actually suffer from mental health issues. And one of the reasons that the legislative committee that I'm a part of is out to end solitary confinement is because solitary confinement actually is known to cause irreparable damage to people in as little as 5 days, right? So in as little as 5 days, people who are put into solitary confinement start to hallucinate, can have delusions, and many, upon returning to the community, never go back to the original state of mind and the state of being that they were in when they entered. So is that a surprise to anybody? I just want to kind of see if anybody is shocked by that, or is that what you've expected to hear?
I was shocked.
Okay, and who's that? What's your name?
I'm Susan.
Okay.
I'm eating my supper, so
Okay, so you're not on camera. I see you. I can see where you are now, Susan. Yeah. So tell me more. What made you shocked by hearing that statistic?
well, it just seems so high. It just seems like, but when you think about it, and you think about, even all the mental health issues that the pandemic has raised,
Mm-hmm.
that it makes sense, but it just seems so high.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as a social worker and someone who practiced in the medical social work field for 12 years, there was an era where people were critiquing the practices of psychiatric hospitals. And so a lot of psychiatric hospitals in Connecticut were shut down. And actually, at one point, I was creating a documentary really exploring the connection between that and the fact that, more people with mental illness are incarcerated than in mental health hospitals. So, it's just interesting that in something that we started to try to help has now had another impact that really is I would say worse. So James, I see your hand up. You have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so that number, is that people who are diagnosed with mental health issues or that they have undiagnosed mental health issues?
Very, very good question. And are you talking about the bottom?
The 20 to 80%. Yeah, the 50 to 80%.
Yeah, I think, James, I think that why the range is so like 20 to 80% is why it's so like far apart is because there are not a lot of measures across the state of Connecticut. And I think nationally in terms of like standardized tools that people are using to diagnose people with mental health issues. So I think that this number is trying to capture who's diagnosed. And that's why you see such the range. And that's why I led with, I think that what's probably more accurate is 50%, because a lot of people are not diagnosed when they're incarcerated. And one of the biggest barriers to transforming the system is how people incarcerated are listened to, right? And you're going to hear me use the term people incarcerated intentionally because, there are many terms that sometimes are used that can dehumanize people, right? But people incarcerated a lot of times are labeled in particular ways, right? They're labeled as they're lying, right? Or they're kind of feigning their symptoms, right? So, you're going to hear me down the line talk more strategically about the bill that we currently have in the Connecticut legislature was just raised in the Judiciary Committee about a week ago. And I'll get into more of the framework of our approach to the legislation and why it matters what we're asking for in this legislation. So very good question, James. So let's see. So I kind of spoke to this already, that there are thousands of people incarcerated in Connecticut that are subject to extreme isolation and solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is known to exacerbate people who have existing mental health issues, and it can cause irreparable psychological damage in as little as 5 days. Now, the other statistic that I want you to be aware of is that the legislation that we've been at work on in Connecticut is not just about people that are incarcerated. People that work in corrections in all different positions are just as harmed by being in an environment where we perpetuate things that are actually considered torturous under international law. Okay, and I'll get more into that and how the United Nations defines torture in the prison system. But correction workers are basically, they have PTSD at a rate that is 7 times higher than veterans, 7 times higher. Now, is that, I would love to hear from one person. Is that a shock to anybody? That the rate that correction workers have PTSD is 7 times higher than veterans who fight in war. Summer, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I would say that to answer your question,
Yeah.
yes, I'm shocked, but I'm also not surprised.
Mm,
Because
yeah.
I can't imagine there's any good kind of human potential empowerment in a prison for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Very good point. And there's actually, has anybody, I might mess up the name, but there's a movie that came out and it was actually based on something that was done in reality. And what they did is they did an experiment where they had certain people actually pretend to be the guards in a prison, and they had certain people pretend to be the people that were incarcerated. And what you saw, right? There's a movie, and I'm going to share it at the end because I'm going to look it up so I can remember. But what you saw by the end of this movie is that the people that were correction workers, they took on this authoritative and this actually abusive characteristics. And it was like within a matter of a couple of days, they were being abusive. Right. So there's a lot of research that shows that people actually enter into the correction system as workers, as employees, even though they have an intention to make a difference. The environment kind of creates and perpetuates this dichotomy, this us versus them. Right. So actually, as you'll hear me talk more about our legislation, our intention is to create more of a humane rehabilitative system for all people, not just those incarcerated, but those that work there. So thank you. Yeah, thank you, Summer. So, okay, so this is just a little bit about, you know, there are a lot of psychological costs to perpetuating a system such as solitary confinement, but in terms of financial costs, per year, the cost of solitary confinement averages $75,000 per prisoner. Okay, this is across the United States. So it's very costly. And nationwide, almost 1 in 10 Black men in the United States are held in prolonged solid isolation in prison at least one time before they're 30. Okay. So solitary confinement is known to shorten people's lifespans. Right? It's not just when people are inside of a prison and they're in solitary confinement that it impacts them. You know, being in the role that I'm in with Stop Solitary CT and interfacing with a lot of people that have been formerly incarcerated, I have friends, you know, a friend that used to be on the committee with me who still wasn't able to be in a space with a large crowd because he was in prolonged solitary confinement for 5 years, right? And so that was impacting his daily life. So, you know, this is, although you will have some people, proponents of solitary confinement, suggest that it is a punishment that works, there's really no evidence that shows that it helps to reduce people's behavior. It's actually quite the opposite, that it causes long-term harm. And actually people who go into solitary confinement at any point during an incarceration, they're actually more likely to recidivate. Right? Because they haven't been given the tools to reintegrate into society, right? So yeah, any thoughts or questions or reflections before I move on from this point? Okay, it's okay if you don't. So, oh, go ahead, Jamie.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Go ahead. Sure.
Back in the back slide, it said Black men. Are we mixing in Hispanic with Black, or are you using Black in the traditional sense?
Yeah, so yeah, great question. So this is using the term Black in the traditional sense. So people who identify as Black, as having some lineage and African, you know, roots, African heritage. You know, I know that the statistic is equally high for men who identify as Hispanic. But I don't have that one in front of me. But yeah, this is the traditional sense. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Jamie, I saw your hand again.
Yeah, well, I didn't really have anything to say. I think you're getting into it now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna, let's see. Give me 1 second just to find my place on the slides here. Okay. So yeah. So what is this term solitary confinement, right? Because this term is used so widely, and it's not always clear what it means. So as a board member of Stop Solitary CT, and according to the United Nations defines solitary confinement as keeping anyone in their cell for 21 or more hours out of the day. And anything longer than 14 consecutive days is considered torturous, okay? So this is the international definition of solitary confinement. And at Stop Solitary CT, I wanna just kind of clarify a few things. So one of the things that we're at work on really getting rid of the culture of isolation that exists in the Department of Corrections in Connecticut. Now, what I mean by that is if you go and you talk to the Department of Corrections, they will say we don't have solitary confinement. Now, they don't call it by that name, but they have what's called administrative segregation or segregation, where people are held in their cell for 21 hours or more daily. And a very unknown fact, and it was unknown to me until I had my brother incarcerated, is that there are many people that are in the general population in prisons in Connecticut that are in their cell 21 hours out the day. So does everybody know what I mean when I say the general population? So what I mean by that is, so I'm gonna give an example. So my brother, when he was incarcerated, he was in Garner Correctional, which is in Newtown, Connecticut. Now, when I say the general population, his daily life being in his cell was 21 hours out the day, meaning he didn't do anything. He didn't have any behaviors. He didn't break any rules. That was from a management standpoint, how the Department of Corrections was choosing to manage that prison by having all people, no matter what they've done, in their cells 21 hours out the day. And that is a common practice across many prisons in Connecticut. So Garner Correctional is one, and that is, and I want you to know that is the main prison with people with serious mental illness go into. There's also Cheshire, where people are in their cells in the general population around 23 hours out the day. And there's McDougall, there's many others. So it's really a misnomer that solitary is only used in very strict circumstances. It's actually a practice that isolation is the norm. Okay, so I'm curious to just, hear any reflections on that. Go ahead, Jamie.
I'm sorry, I'm very interested in this.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'll try not to. So from what I gather, so are these people, do people have their own cells? They're by themselves in their cells?
Not always. Not always.
So you could be, so this would include like my cellmate and I are in there for 23 hours. So
Correct.
It's not necessarily solitary in that you're alone. And I'm just trying to understand. And what you're saying is this is not, because I always understood solitary confinement, like, most of my information about prison is from like movies and stuff, but like you shiv somebody in the yard and then they throw you in the hole and you're in solitary confinement. You're saying this is just a regular practice.
It's a regular practice.
It's just the way they run the place.
Yeah, it's the way they run the place. It's ingrained in the culture to isolate people. Kara, go ahead.
A couple of days ago, I think I read this or heard this on NPR.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
I love Governor Lamont, and I thought he said there's no solitary confinement in Connecticut.
Sorry. I almost can't hold my breath. Go ahead.
Well, no, but did anybody, I saw this a couple of days ago.
So Governor Lamont and the Department of Corrections, if you hear them say that, they're playing with the language and they're not being accountable for the conditions that are actually in the system.
Okay.
And that's the truth. They don't call it solitary confinement, but can anyone here imagine being in a cell the size of a very small bathroom for 21 hours out the day and what that would be like? I just want you to just, even if you have to close your eyes and imagine that day after day, that you're coming out of your cell for maybe 2 hours, or 3 if you're lucky. And that has to include, showering, having a phone call, having a visit with your family if you're lucky enough to get one. So it's really not true. And I don't have anything personally against Governor Lamont, but he's very, he's not fully educated about how terrible this is. And he actually vetoed our legislation, and I'll get more into that because we're at work on still having this implemented. Go ahead, Jamie. I see your hand.
Do they get food brought to them in their cells?
Yeah.
Wow.
Most times people do. Yep.
And they have a bathroom in there, so they just stay in there. All the time.
Yep. They stay in there all the time. And I thought about it after the fact, but towards the end, I'm going to share our website, and there's videos on there, where you could actually see and explore more what a solitary cell looks like. We actually brought a replica cell to the Capitol, I think 2 or 3 years ago, right before COVID. And that really impacted the legislators and people, because you can really experience what it's like. Because just looking at the term solitary confinement, it doesn't sound awful. It sounds like, oh yeah, you're going to have some peace until you could act right. I mean, to dumb it down, but that's not the experience. It's really, you're deprived. There's sensory deprivation. You're deprived in terms of human contact, which is something that really helps people heal and rehabilitate. So, solitary confinement is actually causing people to go crazy in a sense. So I'm sure there's other questions, but I'm gonna move on, okay? So you led us right into a great point, Carol, because I'm gonna talk about the history of our legislation in Connecticut in 1 minute, but I just wanna show you these clips. These are just some clips of inside of a solitary cell. Cells are typically smaller than a parking lot, which is 8 by 16 feet. For many, the few hours of recreation permitted are spent in another cage. And that's not an embellishment, okay? When my brother was incarcerated, he actually was in the hospital in Garner Correctional. And because I'm his conservator, I was able to go on a legal visit with him, and he was in a cage during that visit. And I will never forget that image. So there are really archaic practices that even though to the outside, they may seem like they are to protect and keep people safe, they're really inhumane. And they just need to have something else implemented. So Summer, I see your hand, go ahead.
Thank you. I just every time I hear you say it, I'm like, okay, I think when you say parking lot, do you mean parking spot?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you for that correction. Yep.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't even notice that. Yes, a parking space. My apologies, not a parking lot. That's very big. Yeah, it's a parking space.
Wow, that's small.
Yeah, just, you can even imagine like your wingspan and just not being able to go further than your wingspan. That's another visual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk to you about anybody else have any questions about solitary and what it actually looks like to be in a cell or the size of it? Okay. So I want to talk to you about the history of anti-solitary legislation in Connecticut, legislation that's been put in place to actually prevent this practice from happening, okay? So prior to 2021, the only legislation that had been passed in Connecticut was legislation restricting the Department of Corrections from putting people that were 18 years and younger in solitary confinement. Now, even though that has been a law for many years, at least 5 years, I know many people who work with young people in prisons, and it's just not being followed, right? So last year, I want to bring you to the work that we did last year. So last year, Stop Solitary had a bill called the Protect Act. It was a Senate Bill 1059. It was introduced through Judiciary and through the Senate, and it passed. It passed in the Senate first. There were only 10 people that voted no, and it passed in the House. Okay, and some of the main components of the legislation were really to make sure that people in all prisons in Connecticut were getting out of cell time, right? That they were having pro-social activities, right? So in the 2021 version of the Protect Act, people were mandated to have time out of their cells 7 hours a day. There were things in there where all people, we had to protect their social bonds, right? So they needed to be able to receive contact visits, right? They needed to continue to be able to receive their mail, because these are things that left to their own devices have been taken away from people incarcerated in Connecticut. Okay. And one of the other components of our legislation in 2021 is we wanted accountability and transparency. Okay. Now, one of the things that is missing in a lot of criminal legal spaces and criminal legal systems is accountability and transparency, right? Like, how many people would agree that it's really difficult for police or anybody in this sense to really oversee themselves because of the culture and the values? Like, would you agree that that would be pretty difficult? Yeah. So, there was a point in Connecticut where Connecticut had an ombudsman in prison system. So that was basically a third party that incarcerated people can bring their grievances to and really make sure that they're being resolved and that they're being treated humanely under all circumstances. So that was a major component of the 2021 version of the Protect Act. So, go ahead, Carol.
Like, excuse me, how many ombudsmen were there for all of these prisoners, these
you mean
incarcerated people?
Yeah,
when you said we had a one, there's more than one, right?
Yeah, there was more than one. I'm not clear when it was actually happening in Connecticut before. I don't recall how many ombudsmen that were in place, but when we were advocating for this to be back, it was definitely more than one. It was, maybe at least, one person per facility, right? Because there's over 10,000 people incarcerated in Connecticut. Right. So yeah, not just one. That would be way overwhelming. Give me one sec. So I've already said it, so it's not like it's going to be a big woo, but last year our bill was vetoed by Governor Lamont. He did not sign it into law. And one of the things that he did do is he implemented an executive order which really enforced the status quo in prisons. It didn't really shift anything in the culture. And if anybody's not familiar with what an executive order is, it's temporary, right? So if Governor Lamont doesn't get reelected, there is nothing in place to really make sure that the components have to remain in place. It can just be taken away. So we have returned this legislative session to introduce a new version of the Protect Act. And I'm going to review with you, what does that look like? What are the components of it? Why do we need it? Okay, and then we'll talk about some action steps. Okay. All right, so this is, I wonder if I can make this a little bigger for you, but I'm going to just go over it. Give me one sec.
Raisha, you might try the slideshow function. See up next to share?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Now it's bigger for everybody. Okay. So in this, most of the components of this version of the Protect Act are the same as 2021, but I'm guessing that it doesn't sound like many of you were familiar with the legislation last year. So this is brand new to, I think, most of you. Okay. But in terms of the main components, the Protect Act this year really ensures oversight and accountability. And the only thing that's changed is instead of relying on the mechanism of the ombudsman, which in the past we have heard some criticism that when it was in Connecticut, that person kind of erred to the side of Department of Corrections. We've chosen to use a different mechanism. So this year, the PROTECT Act, when passed, there would be a commission for correctional oversight. And that commission would be made up of a variety of different people. It would be made up of formerly incarcerated people, their family members, experts in medicine, mental health, and a representative from the legislative branches, right? So it's a diverse body of people with different areas of expertise that definitely could, receive the grievances of incarcerated people as a last resort. But the intention really of this is that there's a body ongoingly that can work to transform the system. We recognize that solitary confinement is only one part of the issues and the things not working in the system. So the idea with this body is they would have the authority to go into any prison, to tour, to talk to people incarcerated, to really find out what's going on, to submit reports and recommendations to the judiciary body so that ongoingly improvements could be made. Okay. And then I'm going to go through it and then there'll be some more time for questions. The second component of the PROTECT Act this year is it really addresses the culture of isolation that I was speaking to earlier, and it ensures that all people incarcerated must have at least 7 hours out of cell per day, and that, if solitary confinement is used, it's only used for the shortest term possible. It's used under very extreme circumstances, and that no one incarcerated in the state of Connecticut could ever be put in solitary confinement longer than 15 consecutive days, which is considered torturous under the Mandela rules and international law. Okay, so it also really ensures that there are minimum wellness standards. There are categories of people in this legislation that would never, ever, under any circumstances, be able to be put into solitary confinement. So those groups of people include pregnant women, people diagnosed with serious mental health issues, elderly people over 65 years of age, because all of those categories of people, we're not saying that anybody should be in there, but these groups of people, are more sensitive to the harm that can happen in such a short period of time. So what we've written into this version of the PROTECT Act is also a structure, right? An alternative called residential rehabilitation units. So what that would look like is if, someone that has a serious mental illness, did something where they needed to be separated from the general population, where it wasn't safe for them to be with others in the general population. They would go to a residential rehab unit where they would still be able to have time out of their cell with a staff member, with supervision, that they receive the psychiatric services that they need, and really the care and treatment that they need to be stable. And that goes for all those categories, those groups of people that I mentioned. The other thing the residential rehabilitation units do is that people that on a longer term basis where it's deemed that they really aren't appropriate to be in with the general population, people could stay in the residential rehabilitation units on a longer term basis, right? Because what you have happening now in the state of Connecticut is that people are in long-term solitary confinement. Again, Department of Corrections will say they don't have it. They call it administrative segregation, but that's what it is. So the idea is to provide a structure where people can be separated, which we understand under some circumstances that might be best for people's safety, but not isolated. Totally different things, okay? So, and it addresses all the other components that are under that paragraph there. Okay, so the third thing that the PROTECT Act addresses this year is that it ends abusive restraints and dehumanizing strip searches. So there's very much so an overuse of chaining people, shackling people, locking people while they're actually in their cell, in chains, right? Like that practice is actually very common, and it is really overused, and it's really dehumanizing. So a bill limits the use of restraints to when transporting incarcerated people between units. It allows them to be used as a short-term emergency response to a substantial threat of imminent harm, and as an emergency response, like I was saying, to imminent harm. And then soft restraints can be also used for emergencies that are considered medical and under the supervision of healthcare professionals. Okay, so we recognize, many of us on the board of Stop Solitary CT have had loved ones incarcerated. We work in partnership with Yale, and they have what's called the Lowenstein Clinic for Human Rights. They represent a lot of people incarcerated. And so we know from our personal experiences and from our professional experiences that restraints are overused and that they really do dehumanize people and impacts people's ability to be rehabilitated. The other thing that this version of the PROTECT Act affirms is really protecting people's social bonds. There's so much research that the more contact that people have with their loved ones while they're incarcerated, the more they're able to maintain those relationships, the easier it is for them to reintegrate into society and to truly be rehabilitated. So this provides that at least 2 social letters per week will incarcerated people will be able to receive. It restores access to contact visits for incarcerated people. And that can only be taken away under very rare circumstance. And just, if that kind of sounds like, oh, that's a lot, just to let you in through the lens again of what I experienced with my brother. My brother, the first 90 days of his incarceration, he couldn't have any contact visits where, I could touch or hug him. And that was simply because of what his bond was, right? He wasn't convicted of a charge. His bond was over $150,000, so he couldn't have any contact visits, right? And then he got into, he was actively symptomatic, having hallucinations and delusions within, the first days of his stay. And I can remember, he got into a fight because he thought that his cellmate was trying to do something sexual to him, and he was placed in solitary confinement. Now, who knows? I think he was having auditory hallucinations, and he thought his cellmate said something to him. And instead of giving him more appropriate treatment, he went into administrative segregation in the Department of Corrections, which caused him to deteriorate. So in essence, we're saying the system, the way it's designed, is really a trap. And unless we address the root cause of what people are dealing with, this is not a system where people are going to get better. It's not a system where people are going to rehabilitate. So we're really affirming in this legislation that people, under most circumstances, get to continue to receive letters and they get to have contact visits. All right. And then what I was speaking to before, the PROTECT Act also affirms correctional officer wellness. Okay. It requires that Department of Corrections implement other strategies to support in mitigating trauma and to really support staff with the impact of burnouts, substance abuse, which, people struggle with. A lot of people struggle with working in corrections, and the risk for suicide, right? One of the people that was formerly a member of our committee, she was a social worker in the Department of Corrections, and she went in to really make a difference. And, her story is that, there was someone who was reoccurring in the prison in New Haven, who was known to have substance abuse issues. He was known to have mental health issues. And there was an incident that happened where he ended up being sprayed with chemical restraints, and he was put into a solitary cell and he died, right? And he was someone with a known mental health issues. Now, the next day, this is public, so Kevnisha, I know, doesn't mind that I share about this. The next day she returned to work and was shocked that everything was the same. There was no conversation about the loss of this person that basically died because he was put into restraints and he was put into solitary confinement. There was no extra support for the staff. She actually had post-traumatic stress disorder, ended up resigning at the advice of her own therapist because of what she was suffering and what she was dealing with. And, this is this is common, and only one of the people that was involved in the circumstances that led to Robbie's death was, had formal charges, brought against him. So these incidences are more common than we think, and we really are affirming in this bill that correction officers, it says correction officers, but it's really all people that work inside of Department of Corrections are given these supports that they also need. And then lastly, the legislation, the PROTECT Act, promotes transparency. So requires that there's public reporting on key indicators within the Connecticut correction system, including prevalence of mental illness, use of force incidences, and availability of education and other programs. Now, the reason why that's important is, has anybody here ever just went to Department of Corrections website and browse and try to find out more? No, okay. So you have, Jamie, I see your hand. We have, and there is such a lack of information about what's actually happening. And where we stand is that's actually one of the reasons that abuse and torture is able to be perpetuated, is because there is no transparency. So part of accountability and part of creating transformation in the system is actually being transparent about what's happening and what's not working, so that Department of Corrections can be held accountable and that there could be transformation in the system. Right. So, if you go to Department of Corrections, you're not going to see what I just reported, that in Garner, people are in their cell 21 hours in the general population, or that in Cheshire, people are there 23 hours. But I know that for a fact that's happening because of the qualitative research that I've done, through my brother's experiences, to staff members working in the prison system for many years, and in the interviews, but it's not publicly reported. And that is actually a tool that allows the extreme isolation and the abuse to continue. So this is the components of our legislation for this year. And I would love to take some questions right now. People have questions about the components, or, why did we include it, or just any questions at all for people about our legislation. And I'm just scrolling through my screen because I see your hand, Summer. Go ahead.
Well, and so people do something wrong, right? And they break a law, and your brother's case is a little different. What is prison designed to do? Why do we have prisons in the first place? Because somebody broke a law, right? So they killed somebody, they robbed a store, they did something that we have laws against. So is the intent of prison is to get them out, to make them think about their ways? I mean, it's like I'm going all the way back, right? Why do we have prisons to take people out, people who don't respect our laws, to take them out of mainstream society? Is that what we have?
Well, I think that your question is very layered, and there's no simple answer to the question. I think prisons were designed, yes, on the one hand, prisons are there to hold people accountable so that we have a society that works. But on the other hand, there are many layers of oppression that happen in prison. And I'm not sure, if you're aware, but there's a lot of people that are in prisons that have not been convicted of any crime. They're there pre-trial because they can't afford their bond. And that is another layer of the injustices that they face. So all of this is about holding people accountable humanely. That's what this legislation is about. This is not about letting people off the hook for a crime that they have.
No, I'm not. I wasn't headed there. That's why I said in your brother's case, it was different because it was pre-trial.
Yeah.
I was just kind of looking like the big picture. What are prisons for? Prisons are for ultimately taking somebody, I don't know. It's a question. I actually don't know.
Okay, got it. I got it. I see several other hands, so I'm going to take them. Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
This is John.
Yes.
In criminal justice school, they taught us that there are three functions of the correctional system: deterrence, retribution, which is a big one, like punishment. Now I can't remember the third one, but no one should be under any illusions that prisons are intended to help people. It's that they want to put them away as far away from the general population as possible. And it's one of the questions that I had actually is what you're going to go to action steps in a few minutes.
Yes.
The fact that there's a financial thing here, like in everything else today, if you look at the money, it explains a lot of things. Like the federal correction system is run by corporations that make a lot of money off of imprisoning people. That's why we have mass incarceration. But in Connecticut, in the state system, we don't have that. But this solitary thing, I think some of that may be, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, is that it saves putting correctional officers out there to watch these people who are out of their cells for hours a day. And as the Correctional Officers Union would say, puts them at risk. And so it's more cost efficient to just keep them locked up all the time. Nobody has to ride herd on them.
Yeah.
So are there things in your proposed action steps that address that disincentive to help people?
Can you reframe the question? That address what?
That address the fact that that it's a lot of it is maybe financial considerations and saving correctional officer hours in supervising inmates who are out of their cells.
So yeah, we in terms of addressing that, yes, we have a fiscal report that we created last year that actually showed that it's kind of a myth. It's a myth that it will be more costly to eliminate solitary because of staffing. You know, there was a whole prison closed last year, Northern, due to, you know, our advocacy. Northern was closed. It's considered one of the worst prisons in the nation. So there's this, I think that is partly a myth, that people think that it's going to cost more to have more staff to supervise people. And I don't have that report included in my PowerPoint, but it is on our website. And there are a lot of tools to address exactly what you're speaking to.
Okay, so, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Very, very good points. Randy, I see your hand. You're still on mute, Randy. Go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to take myself off mute as I always do on Zoom.
That's okay.
I haven't done extensive reading, but it's really clear from the reading I have done is that it's really punitive, is what our prisons are about. If you look at other high-income countries, European countries, for instance, particularly places like Norway, they have scientifically based strategies for rehabilitation. Yep. The places where they hold people are they don't look like cages. The relationship between the correction staff and the people who are incarcerated is really different. The way the staff is trained is really different. And all of those things are scientifically shown to provide some rehabilitation. In this country, it's about punishment mostly, and disproportionately, you know, people of color. And I think it's a huge racial issue. And I would highly recommend, there's a book called How the Word is Passed, that talks a little bit more about the prisons, in particular Angola prison in Mississippi or Alabama, I forget which. Louisiana. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the name of the book again, Randy?
How the Word is Passed.
Okay.
By Clint Smith. And in fact, that prison is built on the site of a former plantation. And the inmates are paid 7 cents an hour to pick cotton. And the prison is it's a private for-profit enterprise. And it is really a legacy of the 13th Amendment, where slavery was abolished, except for in cases where someone is convicted of a crime. And a lot of the people in that prison who are convicted of a crime are, you know, it's very questionable about whether or not they were guilty of actually committing anything.
Yeah.
Or you know, yeah. I don't want to go on very much, but it just, and it's a former plantation where 60 to 70% of the people who are incarcerated there are African Americans or Black. And imagine what the international, this is like a quote from the book, imagine what the outcry would be if on Auschwitz, they built a prison that held mostly Jews and they made them work. Like, why don't we have that same amount of international, of people in the United States going, this is completely unreasonable. It's like a perpetuation of, it's essentially a perpetuation of slavery.
Yeah. Thank you.
On.
Yep. Thank you for bringing that in. Very powerful point. John, I see your hand again.
Well, not to go too far down the cynical road, but Randy's absolutely right. And I'm also reminded of the fact that prisons in a lot of cases are about population control, and especially minority population control, as Randy alluded to. The Soviet Union used their mental hospitals to control dissidents and other people that they found that they didn't want in society. The US uses its prison system for the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I think that your points are valid. So any other questions? I'm gonna actually just finish the slideshow and see if there's any final questions. So yeah, just in case you're wondering, Stop Solitary, what are we a part of? We're a part of a national coalition called Unlock the Box. They are one of our funding sources that help to support all of our organizing efforts in Connecticut, but nationally. So as some of you may know, New York just passed some legislation last year that would drastically reduce the use of solitary confinement there. We actually modeled part of our legislation this year off of what their model was, because one of the things that Governor Lamont expressed in his veto was that he felt like our legislation last year was, he didn't say too revolutionary, but basically that's what he was saying, that it actually, what we were asking for was way above what other states were doing. And we were. Right? We were actually advocating that people could only be put in solitary confinement for 72 hours. So we're not by any means saying that this is going to be the end of our advocacy and our work, but we want to start someplace and having better protections for people incarcerated, and the people that work there. So this is, you'll see me in this picture, but this is me and my colleagues at a national conference about 2 or 3 years ago in DC, where we were organizing and strategizing together about what to do in our respective states to end solitary confinement. So you have people in this photo from New Jersey, New York, Maryland, all over the nation. And this was us very close to the White House in that first picture on the left. And you'll see Juan Mendez in the first photo right here where my arrow is. He actually weighed in on what was happening in Connecticut and wrote a letter really deeming the conditions here to be torturous. So he's written a lot about solitary confinement. And these are just more statistics. I think you've had enough statistics today, and some of them I've already said. But I think to the point that multiple people, Randy and John, have raised, right? The design of prison is punishment. And does punishment actually alone work? And it really doesn't. There has to be something beyond that. And it's shown in the numbers, right? That 92% of the people, 92% of people incarcerated in solitary confinement were rearrested within 3 years. That actually shows that this model of punishment and abuse is not working. It is not working. So let's see. Okay, and then these are just this last paragraph here. I just want you to know these are some of the other states that have drastically eliminated or drastically reduced the use of solitary confinement. Colorado, Idaho, Maine, Mississippi, Nebraska, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oregon, Washington, New Jersey. We can add New York to this list because they passed their legislation last year. And in Colorado, violence dropped by almost 80% when they implemented their policies that drastically reduced the use of solitary confinement. And they trained their staff on how to de-escalate people and how to really interact with people humanely. So the statistics actually shows that when other evidence-based practices are implemented to really de-escalate people and have more of a rehabilitative model, it actually works. Not to increase violence, not to make things more dangerous, but to make things safer. So Connecticut is actually behind if you look nationally at what the other states have implemented. Okay, and this is just a summary of what we've already talked about in terms of what's in the bill. Really having people engage in pro-social activities by being out of their cell prepares them to reintegrate society. And there's someone, I think it's a friend and colleague of mine, that said the reentry starts from the time people enter prison, right? Most people who are incarcerated will return to the community. So if we are not preparing them for returning to the community, for transforming, whatever behaviors, whatever life situations had them end up incarcerated in the first place, we're not rehabilitating them. So having this design and this model in prisons really helps prepare people for reintegration into the community and is an access to providing true rehabilitation. So in some, and again, I'll hang around for other questions or any other comments, but right now the Protect Us is in the Judiciary Committee. The bill was raised about a week ago. So that means that it will have a public hearing and that it will be assigned a bill number in the near future. So Michael Quinn, I looked him up. He's in Middlefield. Does anybody know him? Of course. Okay. He voted yes last year. So, what you can do is you can call him again, ask him to vote yes again. Ask him if he'll co-sponsor the bill, right? I'm going to share our website, which has the one pager about the components of the Protect Act in the full version, right? So that's one action you can take. Another action is prepare to give testimony, right? If this is an issue that you care about or you're moved because of what you heard today and you just understand that this is a system that doesn't work, you can sign up to give testimony. We believe that it'll happen. Our public hearing will happen on or around March 16th, okay? That was the date we were given by Gary Winfield, who's our bill champion. He's the co-chair of the Judiciary Committee. And I lead, one of my accountabilities in the role I'm in with Stop Solitary is I lead bi-weekly organizing calls. They're usually on Saturday. If you want to get more engaged, join, create ideas about how to get this passed and how to engage more with the public so the public understands why this is needed and why this can benefit, not just people incarcerated, but all of our communities. And fiscally, this is costly, right? This is our taxpayer dollars that are paying to keep a system in place that's torturous. Third step you can take is share with your friends and family and colleagues. If they're not on this call today, share with them information about the Protect Act. If they're in other districts where people might have voted no, engage with them, ask them to get on the phone and call their legislators. And donate. There's also avenues to donate on our website if you're moved to do that. So I'm going to stop here, and I really thank you for your time, your attention, your engagement, and any other questions or comments for people. Carol, I saw your hand first.
I'm sure it's been all over the place, but give me the website again.
Yes, sure. I don't think it was actually. Stop.
Oh, good. I'm like, how come I don't know the website?
StopSolitaryCT.org.
StopSolitaryCT.org.
Yeah, and I'm going to put it in the chat too. Yep. So there are so many. Maybe I can't use the chat. There we go. Yeah. So there are so many resources on our website. There are videos, we do webinars. We've done recently on February 9th, we had one with some legislators that were on that webinar and people that were recently released from incarceration. So there's a lot up there. If you want to share with other people in your community and have them get engaged, there are so many resources.
Can you also, I have a feeling there'll be some people who might want to get in touch with you and they're going to call me. So
okay.
Can you just give your contact information, please?
Absolutely, absolutely. Should I put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you
Sure.
can say it out loud too, so we can write it down. Some of us with pencils and papers.
Okay, all right, I'll do both. So it's Raisha, R-A-H-I, S as in Sam, H-A, Bivens, B as in boy, I, V as in Victor, E, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam. And it's at yahoo.com. That's my email. And
So I just want to say it's 8:18. So I see a couple people want to talk or
okay.
ask questions, but I know this has been a long night for you, and I just want to make sure that we're off in the next 5 minutes. Does that feel right to you, Raisha?
Yeah, that's fine. And I am fine. So
Okay.
whatever you want to do, it's fine. Thank you. John, I see your hand, and then
This is
Summer.
very quick. Raisha, I
Yeah.
just want to thank you for an excellent presentation.
Hmm.
Very,
Thank
very quick.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you for receiving it and being open to listening. I appreciate it. And all your contributions, right? Because all you said, John, is so important. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. All right, Summer, you had a question?
Yeah, I will contact Michael Quinn.
Okay.
I seem to contact him about once a week about something or other. So
okay.
And he's usually always an affirmative, a yes. And then I'll figure out how to donate some money too.
Thank you.
Yeah,
really appreciate that.
Really well done tonight. Really great. I'm really glad I was here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Awesome. I was like, I don't know if this is going to be too much stats, but thank you.
Raisha, I see Susan has a question or comment also.
Okay, go ahead, Susan. Yeah, I can't see everybody, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was wonderful. It was really quite informative and everything. But I wanted to ask you if you don't mind, how is your brother doing?
Thank you. That's the one thing I wanted to share before I put the slideshow down. He is so wonderful. So last year on Inauguration Day, I was able to advocate for him to get time served for his charge. And that was just a huge weight lifted. And he is just, 10 minutes away from me, living in a residential program. His psychiatric medication is being decreased because of how well he's doing. One of the things that happened right before a judge agreed to release him into the hospital is he had diabetes. He was obese, and he didn't enter prison that way. And so he is no longer insulin dependent. His hemoglobin A1C is down to normal, and it was not when he was incarcerated. He's about to start school. He's going to be studying marketing, which was a lifelong dream. He'll be starting around September. And he was just about a month ago approved to go to like more of an apartment style living. Will there still be staff there about 12 hours out the day, but he's doing so well. He's now ready for less supervision. So he's so good. And oh my gosh, thank you for asking, because that was a part of my presentation and I forgot. And I'm gonna just show you one more quick picture before I take this down. And before we go, so I'm not holding you hostage, but thank you. Except I don't know how to use this well. Oh, okay, I see what to do now. I wanted to show you, this was the picture I didn't show you in the beginning. So this is me and my brother. This is me and Joshua on the left, the day that he was got time served from his charge and left the hospital and went to his residential program. And on the right, that's my wedding. He was able to be in my wedding last July. My husband and I waited for him because it was just so important to us that our family be whole and complete. And he was there. He was in it. He was a groomsman. So this is what's possible when people get rehabilitation. It really, really, really is. So that's why I included it. And thank you, Susan. It means a lot you asked about him. So.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure. And please email me if there's anything else. I would love to stay in contact and support each other. Jamie, you had something?
Yeah. And I have a different representative, so I will contact him.
Okay, sounds good, Susan. Jamie, did you have something else, or you're good? Everybody's good? Okay.
I just
Good
love how
night.
you interweave your personal story and the statistics. We talk about effective messaging and public health, and that's one of the ways to really do it is to have a story that
Yeah.
supports the statistics. So that was just beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I
We bow
appreciate
to you.
Thank you. May I take a picture? It's just for me. If we all smile, may I? Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you so much for caring about this and being open and wanting to hear. And keep up your fight in your own ways.
Let's not forget to take the recording off when we're done.
Okay.
No,
Good
listen,
night.
so if there are people who have not been here tonight to see this, you know, let all the racial justice team know that they can watch this.
Awesome.
Thank you.
you. Good
Good
night,
night.
everyone.
Good night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. That was
Bye.
fantastic.
Thank you. Bye, Carol. Thank you. Bye, Jessica.
Have a good night. Thank you so
You
much. It was
too.
really, truly great.